Hi. So today we're going to talk about the literature review and the introduction and conclusion for your final research paper. Um, the research paper, remember, is about 7 pages or more, and you need at least an introduction, some kind of literature review, and a conclusion. We don't expect you necessarily to have a finished paper, but it should include at least those parts. So we have a literature review outline that you can use to, depending on the type of paper you're planning to write. And so I want to talk a little bit here about that outline. And similar to what you should have done with the critical review, we want you to think about the literature review outline as a series of issues. Now, you may notice that I've started with the second part, the literature review. We haven't talked yet about the introduction. And that's because normally when you write or do research, you do your research first and then you write up your paper. So in this case, we're going to talk about doing your research first and then writing the paper second. So to begin the literature review outline, you need to divide the literature review into a series of issues. Now, I'm going to present in this paper that I wrote, 5 issues. You can have 3 issues, maybe 4 issues. You can have as many issues as you want. You probably should have at least 3, but it's up to you. And each of these issues has a specific purpose. So, for example, this is a paper about a composition course and how we talk about plagiarism. So I divided it into 5 issues. The first issue is the composition course. So I describe in there, the section describes the composition course in which we use blogging. And then the second issue has to do with the students' experiences with plagiarism. And so I describe what the second issue is about. And the third issue is the controversy over plagiarism. The fourth issue is defining plagiarism. And to skip down to the 5th issue, I talk about the debate over punishment for plagiarism. And then I have a brief description. Again, this section describes the different view on what universities should do about plagiarism. And so I have a brief descriptive sentence there about what the outline should be about. So once you complete the outline of the literature review, then you can go back to the beginning of the paper and talk about the introduction. The first question that you need in the introduction is you have to talk about what is the topic and why is it important. So the goal then is to tell the reader exactly what the paper is about and why the reader should read the paper. Okay? So here, notice the topic is, this off a little, blogging is one of the so-called Web 2.0 technologies that it can make it easy for writers to publish and share their ideas. So this is my first sentence. And the topic of the sentence is blogging. And why is blogging important? It can make it easy for writers to publish and share their ideas. Okay. Now, notice one thing, too, about this is, remember, part of your assignment is to use at least 5 citations. And so here, I want to simply use, in the introduction, you can use citations simply to show who's talked about this topic. So I have 2 major figures who've discussed blogging as one of the Web 2.0 technologies, or who've explained what Web 2.0 technologies mean. Okay? Then later, and I put my own name here, I don't need my name, blogging has remained one of the most popular Web 2.0 technologies for use as a tool for introducing students to digital literacies. So the question is, how do you know it's one of the most popular Web 2.0 technologies? And so I cite the author, happens here to be me. So I put in I don't need my name, but I put my name in. So I said that, okay, in 2007. And then, and as a rhetorical space for encouraging students to enter in what Jenkins calls participatory culture. Now, since here I'm using a very specific term that this person Jenkins in these two books has used, I have to cite Jenkins here by allowing them to easily create and share their work. And that's another opinion. So it's an opinion by me. Whoops, spell my name right. And it's an opinion by me. And so I've already published this. And so I've used the citations here both to attribute particular terms, but more importantly, to support claims that I make that might be controversial. So once you've finished the beginning, the first one or two sentences, there's more information we're going to talk about. And just for the sake of making it simple, I've labeled it 2, 3, but they don't always have to be in a particular order. But what you're trying to think about is, what is it in the introduction you need to introduce? What topics or issues do you need to introduce to the reader so the reader knows what the rest of the paper is going to be about? So if you remember from the outline, I'm going to talk about composition teaching, so I may need to discuss composition teaching. Now, I've already talked a little bit about blogging, but the one issue that I haven't discussed yet is plagiarism, because that's one of the main focuses of the paper. So I better get something in about what are the issues, what's the connection between composition classroom, blogging, and plagiarism. What is the connection between those issues? Because that is going to be the main focus of the problem of the paper. Then, if you notice, you need somewhere in the introduction a problem statement. And the goal of the problem statement is to motivate the reason why you're doing this research. All research comes from problems. And so you have to clearly state what is the problem you're going to address. Now, a problem, we can think about it as having two parts. One is, what is the kind of goal of what you're setting out to do? What are you trying to do? And then what is the current reality? And the gap between the goal and the current reality is where you're going to focus your research. So in this case, the goal is that students are involved in the debate inside the classroom about plagiarism, and that plagiarism plays an important role in the academic atmosphere of the university. The reality is, students often enter this highly controversial and emotional debate both confused about the rules they have to abide by and their inability to language abilities to respond. So somehow I'm going to have to fill that goal. Now, when you state the goal, a lot of times you'll see the word however, because there's a contradiction here between what the goal is and what the reality is. And again, my purpose as a writer is to try to fill at least part of that gap. Now, once you state the gap, you need to begin to explain the gap a little more. Now, there are two things to think about. One are, what are the consequences of the gap? And the consequences of the gap are what makes the gap important. So again, one of the things in your introduction is to make your research seem important. And so here the consequences are that many students, regardless of their language background, enter the university with confusion, and they could get caught plagiarizing, etc. And then the other important aspects is, what are the causes of the problem? And the causes of the problem, it's important because it gives the reader an idea of how you're going to solve the problem. So for example, here it says that students have been educated in different contexts. So because I say the word different contexts and educated, my solution to the problem may lie in education. And I'm not going to spell it out yet, but I give an indication in the introduction that's the direction the paper is going. And then the final part of the introduction is maybe a sentence about what the paper is going to be about. Normally this is at the end of the introduction. Sometimes you'll see it at the beginning, but most of the time it's at the end. And this is one sentence, and if you remember, it's a descriptive sentence, not informative, about what the paper is going to cover. And that helps the reader know where you're going. So I say this paper will explore, so I use a descriptive reporting verb, how our students attempted to enter this discussion in their blogs. The final part of the paper is the conclusion. And in the conclusion, there are a number of things that you can do. And I've listed a few. You can do more than that, less than that, whatever you want. But the main idea is that the conclusion is your opinion about what's going on. And it could be some papers it's maybe a paragraph or 2 paragraphs. Some papers it's very long. It kind of depends on your field. Sometimes it's a separate section. Sometimes it's simply the end of the discussion. But in all cases, it's much more subjective. So you have your opportunity. So we want you to think about the conclusion just as you thought about the blogs, which is it's a good opportunity to express your idea. So I'll briefly go over this. The one thing we prefer you not do, although people do it, is summarize, because this is a short paper. You don't need to tell the reader what you already just told them. So you could have a brief summary of what you found in the paper. Okay. I put a number of things in here. Understand the complexity and confusion. See, here, one of the things I'm looking at is to explain why the paper is important. So the fact that my students have grown to understand this, I think is an important finding. And so you're trying to justify. That's one of the questions people ask always about what you write. Why is your work important? And that's what you want to clearly express in the conclusion of your paper. And here, how well could they transfer these voices is an important question for future research. Sometimes you say, what can we do next? So you're trying to, in some ways, justify your research. Remember, the idea of research is that it always creates more research. And so you're trying to show that, yes, my research can create new questions that other people, or maybe myself, can research in the future. Another thing the paper could do is talk a little bit about the limitations. Sometimes it's the idea here is that it's better to self-criticize yourself before somebody else criticizes you. So at least you're aware that there are limitations. And that could help you better understand, help someone respond better to your paper. But again, even when you have limitations, notice after I express my limitations, I next go very quickly back into another reason why my study is important. And finally, again, in the final part, you can talk about directions for future study, or something important about your research. But these are really, the important thing is the conclusion is your opinion about your research. What's good, what may be weak, where it's going. And that's how you need to end the paper.